I'll give you the Ferrari if you can make it run. Damien Kincaid's laughter bounced off the glass facade of Kincaid Luxury Motors and spilled into the courtyard like a cruel ringtone. He said it loud enough for the sales team, the finance guy, and the two couples browsing Bentleys to hear. His manicured hand swept toward a crumpled, sun-faded scarlet wedge of a car parked in the far corner. More monument than machine, a 2019 Ferrari reduced to a snarling knot of bent subframe, dead electronics, and heat-scored engine parts. Go ahead, Damien added, angling his phone for a live stream. Let's all see a master at work. Elias Monroe, 73, stood beside a dusty '98 Ford pickup that had died right in front of the entrance. He wore a faded work shirt, clean but frayed, hands knotted by years, nails trimmed, palms trace-mapped with the memory of tools. He'd only come to pick up his granddaughter after her lunch shift at the front desk. Then the truck coughed, stalled, and invited a spectacle. A cluster of salesmen drifted in, all cologne and mock sympathy. Sir, one purred, maybe step aside. We can call a tow. Damien sliced the air. No, he's got a better idea. The billionaire's grin widened. He's going to fix my Ferrari in exchange for ownership. He turned the camera to the wreck. Backstory for my followers. 5 mechanics tapped out, engine blown, chassis tweaked, electrics fried like carnival funnel cake. Total loss, and a very educational lawsuit for the kid who wrecked at street racing. The emojis began to fly up his phone screen. Elias didn't move. The emptiness of humiliation is familiar. It feels like long corridors and ticking clocks and voices that say you don't belong. He had learned many lifetimes ago that dignity hangs quieter than contempt and lasts longer. May I take a closer look? His voice came steady, a river wearing down stone. By all means. Damien bowed theatrically. Climb in, maestro. Just don't cut yourself. Paperwork's expensive. Snickers rippled. Someone whispered, he looks like he fixes lawnmowers. Another, he's gonna pull a miracle with prayer and duct tape. Elias crossed the lot without looking at anyone. Up close, the car's scent hit him. Char, resin, old fuel. That ghost spice of burnt loom insulation that never quite leaves. His fingertips rested on the dented hood. Beneath his touch, the metal story hummed, the struck note of heat stress, the dull patch where paint had been cheaply resprayed, the faint ripple where a rushed pull tower had kissed the subframe. A sales rep with gelled hair, name tag Ryan, leaned on the counter and called out, Hey, old-timer, my dad's got a scooter shop. If this flops, I could put in a word. Laughter again, shallow, loud, forgettable. Elias unlatched the service panel and began to remove the dead cluster, slow and exact, like lifting the spine from a fish. His hands moved in lines, not circles. His wrist angles were practiced, not guessed. He didn't chase any one problem. He listened to the sum of them. Minutes turned to half an hour. A ring of watchers formed. Dealership staff, 2 teen boys in basketball jerseys, a couple in gym gear who kept the camera up even when they stepped closer. Hashtags evolved in real time on Damien's Live. Dutcher's Ferrari challenge, jerked old man mechanic, impossibly broken. 40 minutes. Sweat purled at Elias's temples. He wasn't racing, he was reading. Damien looked at his Rolex with a sigh so big it begged for applause. 40 minutes in and still optimistic. Admirable. Dedication. Elias finally spoke without looking up. Mr. Kincaid, may I ask a question? Damien chuckled. By all means. Have you ever built anything with your own hands? Not purchased, not delegated, built. The billionaire blinked. I built an empire. That's buying, Elias said gently. It was not sarcasm, not even a rebuke. It was a statement of taxonomy. What belongs in which family? The circle tightened, the laughter hesitated. Elias's fingers paused above a junction box. He inhaled slow. There, a cut mark dressed as burn, the telltale little crater where a wire sheath had melted inward instead of out. His knuckles brushed the fuel rail and found a whisper of scoring that didn't match accident vectors. He traced a bolt head and felt the torsion signature. Twist in, then wrench back. Not from impact, but from human insistence. Phillips number 2, he said softly. Insulated handle. Drawer 3 on the red bench. Second shelf, beside the torque set. Ryan blinked. How would you... We don't... I mean, maybe... It's there, Elias murmured. When Ryan, confused, somehow obedient, returned with exactly that tool, the joke hum in the air dimmed by half. Damien's voice pitched up. Clearly our friend has toured many a modest workshop. Elias didn't honor the bait. He loosened a cover, eased it away, unlaced a loom like a patient unbraiding hair. The hush changed. Even the phones got closer. Grandpa, Ray appeared at the edge of the crowd, brown curls escaping her clip, a paper cup of iced coffee sweating onto her palm. Her eyes took in the lot, the cameras, the wreck, and then found Elias's bent back. Color drained from her face. Anger painted it back in fast strokes. "What's happening?" she asked, stepping through the cluster. "Mr. Kincaid? Employee?" Damien said brightly, never taking the lens off the scene. "Your friend is starring in a little experiment. If he can revive my trophy, he gets the keys. House rules." Ray's jaw tensed. She knew the way Kincaid turned afternoons into content. She also knew what her grandfather never wore on his chest like a medal, because men like him didn't need to. A history in machines so deep it had its own weather. "Grandpa," she said steady, "do you need anything?" "I'm all right," Elias answered, and kept working. He separated a connector with a half twist that would have snapped if he'd forced it. Beneath the insulation told its story plainly now. A deliberate nick gilded with heat to mimic a surge. A tiny smear of tool steel on a bracket where a brake had been hand-wrenched. A pattern of discoloration that spoke not of accident, but orchestration. A murmur ran through the ring. "You know," Damien said, and for the first time his voice rode too high. "That car was investigated. Police report, insurance, everything proper." "Of course," Elias replied. He didn't even look up. "But investigation is a matter of what you know to seek." He plucked a small plate from the block, an ID tag most people never notice, stamped with data that would mean nothing to casual eyes. He rubbed away soot with his thumb until the characters gleamed faintly. Ray watched the movement and saw the smallest, strangest thing. The way his shoulders softened, as if he were recognizing an old song from the first two notes. "Mr. Kincaid," Elias said, at last meeting the billionaire's gaze, "how much did your insurer pay out on this vehicle?" A hairline crack appeared in the afternoon. Damien smiled, but the smile was a paper mask in the rain. "Why?" "Because," Elias answered and held the tag up to the courtyard light, "for 3 decades, the men and women I worked with taught me that every engine has a signature. And this one writes its name." Phones lifted higher. Someone zoomed in. Ryan swallowed. "What are you saying?" Damien's words landed out of time, a half-beat late. "That this failure wasn't a failure," Elias said. "It was a decision. Heat baked into the wrong place for just long enough. Wiring cut and then scorched to hide the cut. A handbrake forced, not by force of impact, but by a hand that knew what to mimic." A woman in gym gear whispered, "Sabotage." The word crossed the lot like a shiver. Damien laughed too fast. "That's imaginative. We have reports." "Reports are maps," Elias murmured. "Maps are only useful if you're already on the road they illustrate." Ray stood beside him now, coffee forgotten. She could feel the crowd's tilt, the turn from mockery toward awe, and the deeper undertow of something else. Accountability. Elias rested his palm on the wounded engine once more. He could hear it already, what it would sound like when it breathed again. Not today, not yet. He had more reading to do. But soon. 10 good minutes and 2 clean fixes if the parts were salvageable. If not, an elegant bypass. There were always choices inside the machine if you respected what it was trying to tell you. He looked back at Damien. "Honor your offer." "My offer? If I get it running, the car is mine." Now the billionaire hesitated, movie-bright teeth dimming. The live comments scrolled, "Do it. Contract now. He's got you. Back out and you're finished." He glanced at the camera, at his curated reflection on the black glass, and hit the swagger again. "Done," he said. "You have 20 minutes." Elias smiled just with his eyes. "I won't need 20. He reached for the loom, then paused. "Ray, sweetheart, could you bring me a roll of heat shrink from service? The thin black, not the gray, and a small length of clean wire, not tinned." How do you even... Ryan began, then stopped. He didn't need to ask how Elias knew where everything lived here. Some people walked into a room and bent it around content. Others walked in and heard how it worked. Ray took off at a run. Cameras tracked her. The crowd held its breath. Elias set the ID plate down on a cloth and brushed its corner with his fingertip once. Quietly, almost to himself, he said, "Marinello never forgets." Across from him, Damian Kincaid swallowed again, hard enough that the mic on his phone picked it up. For the first time all afternoon, a crack of doubt split his performance. Elias leaned over the heart of the car and began the first of three very specific corrections: precise, reversible, undeniable. The afternoon shifted like an engine catching the faintest spark before the first true roar. And somewhere between humiliation and history, the deal of a lifetime clicked into place. Ray returned from service with the heat shrink and a short, clean length of wire. Breath quick but steady. She placed them on the fender pad as if setting down a scalpel. Elias thanked her with a small nod and resumed the patient choreography that had silenced the courtyard. He trimmed a burnt sheath to expose the honest copper beneath, slipped on the shrink, spliced in the new run, and warmed it until it hugged the join like a seal meant for oceans. He inspected a connector pin with a jeweler's suspicion, then polished away a film of residue most eyes would have missed. His fingertips read a relay, felt its faint rattle, and chose another from the tray without breaking the rhythm of breath. The crowd had shifted from theater to study. Two teenagers edged closer and whispered guesses to each other that they did not post. Ryan stood awkwardly by the red bench, caught between the instinct to preen and the urge to learn. Even Damian's stream comments grew slower, like people watching a surgeon and remembering they too have a body. Elias paused at the cowl and traced a cable as if following a river upstream. His mouth softened at the corners. He reached under the intake and found a small bracket hand-bent the wrong way. Not a crash bend, a created obstacle. He straightened it with a padded plier, then set his palm on the plenum. He did not look up when he said, in the tone of someone confirming a hunch already resolved, "This was made to fail for 4 minutes and then tell a story of heat." Damian tried to laugh and failed. He gestured to the phone with stiff showmanship. "Sir, if you are finished proving your thesis, perhaps we might test your grand claim. The Ferrari belongs to a content creator's audience right now, and they demand a climax." Elias glanced at Ray. "Would you do the honors? Seat, pedal, nothing dramatic. If she says anything weird, you stop and you tell me exactly what she said." Ray slid behind the wheel with care. The interior smelled like leather and memory. She set her hands at 9 and 3. The cluster was still loose, so Elias propped it where it could speak without tearing a wire. He gave the loom a last honest look, then turned to the battery kill and reset the car's tired brain. He spoke to the machine the way some people talk to a dog they love. "I hear you. We are not forcing this. You will tell us what you want, and we will accept it." Ray turned the key to ignition. The cluster blinked. A heartbeat of nothing, then a string of lights breathed across and settled in a pattern that matched Elias's private map. He nodded. Again. She turned to start. The first crank came as a cough, not childish, not weak, just the voice of something waking. The second caught and hiccuped. Elias lifted 2 fingers and Ray stopped. Let the fuel settle. Let the air measure itself. He adjusted one connector by a single hair. Third try. The engine inhaled, and then it was there. Not the ragged bellow of a wounded animal, not the rattle of a lie. A clean, round sound that filled the lot, climbed into the air, and settled in the chest of every person present like a bell that knows its note. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a shout, then another, then the sound of 2 teenagers jumping in circles they would later pretend they had never made. Someone whooped, someone else cried. Phones swung wide to capture the whole lot. The engine idled at a figure that made people who cared about figures smile without knowing why. Ray's eyes glistened. She eased the throttle. The pitch rose with grace and returned home without a wobble. She looked at her grandfather. He nodded once. She killed the engine and the courtyard exhaled as if a wave had washed through. Damian kept his smile the way a man keeps a shield that is already cracked. Well done. Terms are terms. You have a running car. May we call it yours? assuming proper paperwork. He sounded like someone reciting policy he did not write. Elias wiped his hands and reached into his pocket. He placed the small ID plate on the cowl again, where cameras could see it. This does not just make the car mine, it makes the story different. You said 5 mechanics tried. They were not wrong to say it was broken. They were wrong to accept the surface of the brake. He looked directly into Damien's lens. I am going to ask your insurer how much they paid. Not because I want that money, but because people who work with their hands deserve to live in a town where the truth is told. A woman near the back finally found her voice and asked what several were thinking. Are you saying someone here did it? Elias shook his head once. I am saying someone somewhere did. Perhaps the young heir who wanted to erase a mistake. Perhaps someone who fixes numbers by breaking things. Perhaps no one you have ever met. But when wires confess, they never lie. Ray stepped out of the car. Her chin was high now, not defiant, just right. Mr. Kincaid, we will need a bill of sale and a title-marked transfer. Also a statement clarifying that the promise was made publicly and accepted. Your stream will serve. She did not wait for his assent. She turned to Ryan. Would you bring the title book and a sales form? Also one clean folder? We are going to do this properly. Ryan moved without irony. He glanced once at Elias and saw he was watching the work, not the person, and felt both humbled and lighter. He returned with paperwork like a student returns with chalk to a favorite teacher. Damien stalled for half a minute that everyone could see. The live comments swam in 2 directions at once. Some still mocked a world where a 73-year-old black man could claim a Ferrari in a story because he had turned 3 truths in the right order. Many more had the clear short sentences that people write when they are surprised into honesty. That is how a person works. That is how a promise works. That is how a sound tells you it is true. Damien signed where he had to sign, right hand too tight around the pen. Elias signed once, slow. Ray slid the folder into place and lifted her phone to picture the signatures with the ID plate in the foreground. She sent the image to 3 places she had chosen before she walked here. Her face said she slept well even on nights when others did not. When the crowd thinned, an older man in a pressed polo stepped forward and spoke low. My name is Howard. My company insures specialty vehicles. What you just did reads like a textbook chapter we should have written years ago. If you are willing, I would like to arrange a conversation that begins at 9 in the morning tomorrow and does not end until you have told us what you know about how fraud sounds. Elias smiled the way a man smiles when a door he never asked for opens to a room he has always loved. I will come, but if I come, a few apprentices will come with me. Damien packed his stream gear with hands that shook. He looked up once and found Elias watching him, not with hatred, not even with triumph, with the kind of mercy that does not excuse but also does not consume. It made him angry because it made him small. As the sun tilted, Ray locked the showroom doors. The Ferrari sat quiet now, legal in its new name, warm in its new honesty. Elias rested his palm on its fender and said softly to Ray what he had not told anyone who did not already know. When you spend your life making something breathe, you learn to hear a lie. Today we chose not to let the lie win. By morning, the clip had found millions. Someone cut it into a tidy arc where contempt opens the curtain, craft does its work, and a bargain keeps its word. It ran on every channel that likes to be first at noon. A sports account set it to a track with a galloping drum. A teacher used it in homeroom. The comments did the thing comments do, and also did something rarer. People told stories of their fathers and mothers and neighbors, whose hands had learned a language no one in an office ever praised out loud. Howard sent a car to fetch Elias and Ray. The insurer's downtown office smelled faintly of toner and deliberation. In a glass room where potted plants leaned toward the long window, a forensic engineer named Priya unrolled a schematic, and a data analyst named Mateo pushed a tray of coffee and pastries like offerings to a temple. Howard kept the introductions short. Please teach us. Elias did not build a lecture. He built a conversation. He started with what failure looks like when it is honest. He showed how heat walks across a surface when a fuse does its brave job, and how it lies there when someone asks it to dance for money. He passed around a small bracket and asked them to close their eyes and describe the difference between force that arrives in a shriek and force that arrives with a wrench. He demonstrated the bracket twist with a small tool and a pressure that made people wince without quite knowing why. He pulled up the ID image Ray had made and explained how makers leave signatures that are not just numbers, but ways of doing. He did not accuse any named person. He did not need to. By mid-afternoon, Priya had a list of 17 losses to revisit, and Matteo had a model that highlighted clusters of claims where the story and the metal did not agree. Howard scribbled a number on a notepad and slid it toward Elias, then pulled it back when he realized he was doing business rules with an elder who treated rules like levers, not walls. He tried again with a different offer. Would you consult for us for a season? Set your hours. Bring who you like. Teach us how to see. Elias looked at Ray. She tilted her head a fraction toward yes. He nodded. One condition. You sponsor apprenticeships, not for the loudest resumes, for the hands that already tell the truth when they hold a tool. Howard smiled a smile that looked like policy forming in the right place. Done. News does not stop at the door. It traveled to a district office with 3 letters above the door and a seal that the daylight likes to catch. An agent named Martinez called Howard. An agent named Wu called the dealership. Ray answered with the steadiness of a person who has watched storms arrive and knows which windows to latch. By Friday, Damien's counsel had advised him to be cautious with microphones. By Saturday, an accountant with an exhausted conscience had sent a quiet packet to a federal address that does not accept packages unless they are expected. The packet contained numbers and 2 emails that burned as clean as an arc. They spoke of a practice, not an accident. They named a set of cars, not a single trophy. They asked for silence in a tone that made readers sit up. Ryan came to Elias's garage on Sunday morning. He did not bring hair gel. He brought a notebook and a mouth that made fewer jokes because the new shape of his respect had rearranged his timing. He said, I am sorry 3 different ways and meant all 3. Elias handed him a rag and pointed to an engine stand with a block that had a story to tell. Read it, he said. Not with your eyes. Not. With your wrists. They spent the morning learning to listen. Elias showed him that torque has a memory if you treat it like history. He taught him how paint gives up truth when you scratch it under the right light. He asked him to sell him an imaginary car and then pointed out every place he had tried to fill a moment of fear with a flourish. Ryan wrote until his hand cramped and then kept writing. Ray watched from the doorway and decided that some redemptions deserve a second day. On Monday, the insurer sent over 2 vehicles for review and set up a camera to record the process, not for content, but for training. Elias wore his old work shirt. He greeted the cars like neighbors. He nodded to Priya when she pointed, and she nodded to him when he chose a different panel to open first. Matteo grinned whenever numbers that had tried to hide walked into the room and sat down on the table. The second car had a pattern that matched the Ferrari so closely that Elias felt a chill. A niche technique, he said, voice low. Not copied from a message board. Taught. They looked at each other across the table with a mutual understanding of how knowledge travels. Sometimes it moves through family. Sometimes it moves through hunger. Sometimes it moves through rooms like this one, though that is the kind they could stop. Ray's phone buzzed. She stepped into the hall. A reporter wanted a quote. A cousin wanted to brag. The dealership wanted to offer her a promotion. She turned that one over in her mind and decided to let it sit. Power does not scare her. It just needs a good place to live. By midweek, the agency had invited Elias to the federal building. The conference room smelled like quiet. Agent Martinez tapped a pen against a pad with a rhythm that sounded like marching when she was thinking, and like breathing when she had decided. You have given us a thread. We are going to pull it. If there is fabric, we will find the loom. Elias nodded. He did not smile. He did not need joy to be loud in order for it to be present. He had watched too many teams cross finish lines to mistake noise for arrival. 2 days later, a magistrate signed papers. On a bright morning that made the courthouse steps look like they had not seen a century of feet, officers knocked on a tall glass door in an expensive zip code. Damien opened it himself, which is not how he had pictured this part of his life. He tried to talk faster than the warrant could read. The warrant did not speed up. When they cuffed him, he looked past the officers at a camera that did not belong to a content team. That camera looked back with the blank face of a public record. At the dealership, customers came and went as if buying a car were still a thing that happened between people. Ray stood in the manager's office looking at a desk that was about to be hers if she said so. She did not tell herself a story about revenge. She told herself a story about duty. Work turns into power when it has somewhere generous to land. She signed the acceptance and sent a picture of the nameplate to her grandfather. He wrote back one word: proud. The Ferrari arrived at the garage on a flatbed that looked too humble for what it carried. Elias rolled it down and parked it where the light from the open door fell clean across the hood. He did not start it. He sat beside it on a stool and ran his hand along the fender as if patting a horse. Ryan swept the floor without being told. A teenager named Micah checked the air in 4 tires that needed it. Priya texted a photo of a training room in which a new slide bore the title, Listening to Metal. Mateo sent a graph with a curve that used to speak of money and now spoke of a problem ending. Elias closed his eyes and heard the engine he had woken days ago. He could still feel that moment when it chose to live. He looked at Ray standing in the doorway and knew that the day's true sound was not the car. It was the sound of something heavier and lighter at once. The sound of a town that had decided it liked the truth more than a clever lie. Trials take their time, as they should. The headlines that had shouted turned into updates that did not trend, and then into quiet rows of docket numbers that only lawyers enjoy. Damien's counsel filed what it could. The court listened and declined where it must. In a plea that would later be taught in ethics classes, where nobody has yet figured out how to grade conscience, he admitted to a scheme that would have thrilled a less sober storyteller. It was not art. It was repetition. The same wound opened in the same way and told the same lie, until someone who knew the language said enough. The sentencing hearing held the solemnity of rooms where people decide how long a life should wait before it can choose again. The judge spoke about the difference between wealth and worth. Damien stared at his hands. Reporters wrote neat paragraphs and then went home, because there are only so many ways to say a story about a man who forgot what promises are for. Ray ran the dealership like a conductor who expects the woodwinds and the brakes to care equally. She changed the morning meeting from pep talk to case review. She asked techs to present a 5-minute checkout of a fix they were proud of, not to praise but to teach. Sales numbers rose quietly because customers could tell when a culture loves the thing it does. Her email filled with resumes from people who wanted to work where a promise had been kept in public. Elias formalized the apprenticeship. He called it a circle because he disliked ladders. He asked applicants to bring both hands and a story. He taught on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sometimes on Sundays if the light was good and a certain kind of problem had shown up with a shape that made him happy. He paid stipends with the insurer's consulting checks and laughed when Ray scolded him for not keeping enough and then did the math to make it sustainable. He published a 1-page sheet titled Respect is a Tool and printed it large enough to hang in service bays across the county. Howard returned with an idea. The insurer would endow a foundation named after Elias, not because of the internet or a case, but because institutions tell the truth about themselves by who they fund. Priya volunteered to run a summer program that would teach teenagers to read metal, but also to read contracts and to ask good questions when someone waves a camera. Mateo built a dashboard that measured not just money saved, but claims made honest. Numbers can be honest when we ask them to prove how they help. Ryan stood at the front of a class one afternoon and explained the difference between a pitch and a conversation. He showed the apprentices where he had failed to listen, in sales and in life, and how listening had made him not just better at selling, but better at apologizing. After class, he asked Elias if forgiveness is a finish line or a practice. Elias handed him a socket and said both, then had him torque 3 bolts until the wrench clicked with a sound that felt like yes. The Ferrari did not become a trophy, it became a curriculum. When the hood opened and the apprentices leaned in, Elias made them name each piece and then make a case for why it might lie if asked. He wired in a transparent fuse box so they could watch current with their eyes. He mounted a camera so they could replay their hands and catch the moment habit tried to rush. He labeled one corner of the whiteboard "We were wrong today" and wrote there first, so nobody else had to be brave before him. On a clear evening in late summer, the town gathered for a modest ceremony under strings of lights in the dealership lot. There was lemonade in paper cups and a folding table with cookies and 3 speeches planned. Ray spoke first and thanked people by name because she understood gratitude needs subjects and verbs. Howard spoke second and made a joke about auditors that actually landed. Elias did not want to speak third. He told Ray he had said enough for 3 lives already. She smiled and said people still need to hear the right sound. He stepped to the little podium with the unlovely microphone and folded his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. The evening settled around the quiet like a shawl. When he finally spoke, his voice was the same one he used with engines and children and stubborn bolts. For 40 years, I tried to make machines that would not betray the people who trusted them. Last week, someone asked me when I decided to fight a different kind of betrayal. I did not decide. I simply kept doing the same job in a bigger room. The room is called community. He looked up and met eyes. We do not need cameras to be good. We do not need applause to tell the truth. We need each other to keep our promises and to fix what is broken without insulting it first. He paused and let the sentence end rather than improve it. Then he did something nobody expected. He asked the apprentices to come forward and place their hands on the fender of the Ferrari one by one. Not to bless it, but to remember that machines are made of choices. The line formed. Micah first. Then a young woman named Luz, whose laugh filled rooms like a bell. Then Ryan, who hesitated and then did not. Then Ray, last, hands steady on paint that now contained more stories than layers. When the line ended, Elias turned the key and the engine woke. Not to stun the crowd, to give the evening a heartbeat. It idled there while the sky changed colors and a breeze moved through shirts and someone's child clapped, because clapping is what we do when things that should work do. Weeks turned into a season. The federal case moved the way federal cases move, which is to say with a patience that makes sense when you stop insisting on montage. The foundation started its first cohort with 12 apprentices who learned the difference between heat and light. The insurer published a quiet report that did not brag. The local paper ran a photo of Elias with grease on his hands and a grin he did not know he still had. A letter arrived one afternoon on paper that wanted to be expensive even in humility. Damien had written from a place where the schedule is not yours. He did not ask for sympathy. He described the small economies of a life shrunk to fit a consequence and the strange relief of days with no stream. He thanked Elias for not humiliating him when humiliation would have been easy. He asked a question that was too big for a reply. How do I earn back the right to be trusted? Elias sat with the letter longer than people sit with mail. He wrote a reply that was shorter than it felt. You start with a promise you can keep that helps someone else and does not help you. Then you keep another one. Then you teach someone younger than you how to keep theirs. He did not sign with titles. He signed with his name. Near dusk that same day, Elias and Ray took the Ferrari out on a road that curled along the river. The light poured like honey across the hood. The engine spoke the even syllables of a language that will still be beautiful when we are gone. Ray drove. Elias watched her watch the world. They did not talk about fame or money or the week when everyone had an opinion. They talked about apprentices and inventory back orders and what to plant in the small rectangle of dirt behind the garage that catches the morning sun. Ray wanted herbs. Elias wanted tomatoes because tomatoes smell like summer if you touch them right. On the way home, Ray said the title out loud in the quiet of the cabin, the sentence that had started it all. I will give you the Ferrari if you make it run. She smiled and shook her head. I think he meant a different car. Elias smiled back at the road. No, he meant this one. He just did not know what running really looks like. They drove on. The river kept them company. The town they loved came up ahead and opened its arms with streetlights. The engine warmed and hummed and made a sound that many would describe as power, but that Elias had always called something else. It sounded like a promise it kept.